Hello and welcome to this UniTaster On Demand event today. My name is John Cheek. I'm the founder of UniTasterDays. And with these events, we introduce what it's like to study lots of different subjects at university. The subject today we're going to be looking at is games, so things like games design and games production. We like to cover why you might be interested in studying that course, what to expect on it, application tips and careers. And these events are always impartial, so provide a really useful impartial guide to studying the subject as well. I'm joined today by two colleagues from the University of Huddersfield. That's Dr. Duke Gledhill and Dr. Daryl Marples, and they're going to provide a guide to the four areas I mentioned a second ago. But again, just to remind you, the subject today is games. And with that, I'll pass things over to Daryl and Duke. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Daryl Marples, and I'm joined today by Dr. Duke Gledhill. And we're going to be talking to you today about games studies at university. Our emphasis is going to be on game production and also talking to you about how you go about making the transition from university to a career in games.
Right, let's switch over to the slides. So, as Daryl says, we're both from the University of Huddersfield, and let's dive straight in.
So first of all, why would you even consider studying games at university? Well, we find that most of our students do have a passion for games, but the main thing that we're looking for is students that are creative and that enjoy solving technical problems, and they know what the games industry is about. Obviously, as our slide shows here, the games industry has evolved over the last several decades into the world's largest entertainment sector. And this means that there's lots and lots of opportunities in that sector for everyone from programmers through designers and artists, musicians and VFX people. And we'll talk more about those roles individually as we go through this presentation.
So yeah, there's many areas of video games development, but some of them are less obvious, I think, to begin with. So I think a lot of people, when thinking about games development, the subjects that leap out would be the programming. Somebody needs to build an engine, somebody needs to write some tools, somebody needs to put those levels together, somebody needs to think about the gameplay and the flow and how making it interesting, making people come back and play again. And then somebody, of course, needs to make the characters and the environments. But then beyond that, there are elements that don't leap out straight away. Things like the experience, the user experience of actually interacting with that world, with the maps even, with the menus. When you blow something up, there are visual effects. There is lighting to give mood, sound, music, and even beyond those creative roles, things like project management, producer roles, marketing, server management behind the scenes. If you think about huge MMORPGs running on servers across the globe, that's a lot of technical management and work behind the scenes. So video games is a huge, huge industry.
Yeah, and we can guarantee that it's not going anywhere as well. I mean, it's obviously, you saw from the previous slide that the industry continues to grow. We're all quite excited about where VR is going to go next. We think that's going to be a major growth area in the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. And even AR as well. AR is moving almost as fast as VR. I'm looking forward to playing games in the real world through an AR headset of some kind.
So what would you expect on a games development degree? Well, development, we need to emphasize this for everyone that's watching this. Development is about creating games. It's not about just playing games. We do obviously expect all of our students to have some understanding of games, and they will have played many games, but for us it's about dissecting those games, understanding how they tick, and coming in with fresh ideas on how to build your own exciting project. Also, you have to understand there's so much that goes into making things work within a real-time environment. So everything within a game needs to be optimized, whether that's the code or the art assets, or simply the way that the game mechanics actually work, you need to think about embedded loops and things of that nature to make sure that what you're doing is reusing systems so that you aren't creating everything in that game bespoke. And understanding of those systems takes time. So that's one of the reasons that you would study at university. We always say that everybody has an idea for a game, but making them is really complicated. So that's what we really want you to think about. If you've got that passion and you know that this is something that you want to take forward and develop that core skill set, we are there to help you get through that. Also, you need to realize that, as we've already said, you need to develop your core skill set. You need to decide what it is that you want to do in the game sector, because you'll end up working with experts in many, many different fields. And you're just a cog in a machine. You know, you are part of a development process when you're developing a game. And we would emphasize that if you're looking for a game design degree, then you should find a degree that allows you to work in interdisciplinary ways. You want to study on a course that will allow you to, say, if you were developing an art understanding, you would work with programmers and designers and audio engineers to bring a whole game together. That would give you the best experience of what it's actually like to work in that industry as a career.
I was going to dive into this slide, Daryl, but I think actually being art, it might be better if you put this one.
That's fine. So one thing we've not mentioned so far is that Duke and I come at this from very different angles. I previously worked as a games artist, and I've been teaching games art for a very long time, and Duke's get very much on the technology side of the problem solving. So yeah, if you want to study art at university, games art in particular, then you really want a course that speaks to creation of visual design assets. You might want to work in character creation, but there's so much that goes on in a game. Obviously, all games have environments, and some of those environments will be organic. So if you want to sculpt those environments rather than just creating things from polygons, you really do need to learn about digital sculpting, and that digital sculpting tool set obviously works in conjunction with what the character artist would do as well. So there's very much crossover between those things. Also, you probably want to think about all of the 2D elements. You might want to create a 2D game, but also most video games will have some 2D content anyway. So if you think about any user interface design, it is likely to contain some use of 2D assets. So you need to learn some aspect of graphic design in there as well. And then finally, VFX design is something that's often overlooked, but it's actually core to virtually all games that you ever play. If you think about the games that you play, most of them, if not all, will have quite complex visual effects going on there, from particle effects to other types of visual effects. So somebody needs to create that. And again, that's a complex pipeline that requires artistic ability as well as a technical underpinning.
So we've got some design slide now. I will let Daryl talk a bit about this, but before he does, I will just throw in a bit about the visual scripting and the game's prototyping, because that sits more on that technical side. So Daryl will talk a bit about that, the design, coming up with the ideas, but often a designer will need to realize those ideas in some way, in some small prototype, in order to then maybe convince a publisher that they want to take that game forward. And it involves then putting those levels together. So there's prototyping, rapid prototyping as quickly as possible, because you need to get the idea across to a team of artists or programmers or publisher, whatever it might be. So you might see tools like, the most common ones would be Unreal and Unity, for example, for those prototyping type situations. There are other engines available as well. And then a note on visual scripting. Quite often visual scripting is, well, I think in every case, visual scripting is faster. It might not be as efficient, in terms of the runtime speeds, but it is certainly faster to get your idea from your brain onto a screen so that people can play it and understand what you're trying to get across. And Daryl, if you want to talk more about the other aspects of that, the analysis.
Yeah, I think what Duke's just said there is absolutely correct, and obviously we would encourage you that if you're going to study at university, that you look for courses that allow you the opportunity to do that visual scripting. What you want to be doing is thinking about how that game is created. It's all well and good to just have an idea for a game, but you have to understand how that game is realized. So crucially, you may be able to express your ideas on paper, and you may be able to write those ideas down. You may be able to create things like mood boards, and you're bringing examples from other games that you've played. What we always start when we're developing games with a simple elevator pitch. Can you describe your entire game in the time that it would take to ride up in an elevator and explain it to somebody else? But these are key core problems that you need to solve, but ultimately prototyping is where it's at. In order to really understand whether your game is going to work, all of that prototyping needs to come together. So learning how engines work, learning how to create systems is absolutely core and key to designing games.
And then the other aspect, the other side of the coin, if you will, is that core programming. So somebody needs to make the engine. So you may have heard of the big engines like Unreal and Unity and things like that. But somebody had to write that engine in the first place for the designers and the artists to then implement gaming. So our programmers tend to work at that engine type of level. So subjects would be, of course, programming, but more importantly, optimization. You know, if your target platform is mobile or console, you can't just go throwing polys and memory around like there's no tomorrow. You've got to be considerate. You know, you have limited resource, so you have to be extremely good at optimization of the code. Maths is obviously important, really important. If you're going to fire a bullet, throw an object, or float something around in the world, we're going to need maths. We're going to need maths for all sorts of things. Inverse kinematics, for example, for the characters. There's a lot to consider. So I've mentioned engines already, but understanding engines, you know, how is the networking done? The sound system, the rendering engine. There's a lot in a game engine. It's not, you know, not just the end result. There's a lot goes under. And then aside from that, things like shaders. So, okay, there are kind of the obvious leap out ones, things like water. You know, we always think, oh, shaders, let's make some water. But actually, shaders is huge. It's everything from the shininess of an object to a cartoon shader to make your entire game look like it was some kind of cartoon. There's a lot to shaders, and they can do a lot. They're very powerful, and there's even different types of shaders. So it's a huge subject. And then in terms of interaction, haptics we've got here, for example. How do you interact? If I take away the mouse, the keyboard, the controller, how do you interact with it? How do you deal with feedback when you're accelerating and the wheels are spinning? Do you send some kind of haptic response through the controller? And how do you deal with that?
I think that ties really nicely to that final point as well, Duke. I mean, that whole thing of where we're going with VR. One of the bigger issues of VR at the moment is that there's no real tactile feedback.
Yeah.
And that haptic feedback is starting to be developed, and it's going to be a very interesting time when we not only have the visuals, but you can reach out and actually physically touch something in that environment by wearing a force feedback glove, which potentially is not just force feedback, but actually has haptic sensors, so you can actually feel the roughness of a surface at the end of your fingertips.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that future. The future's not coming quick enough for me. Anyway, so programming is a huge field. I think same as every of the others, but certainly in that kind of technical building scenario. So let's move on to some application tips.
Sure. I mean, the key thing for us, and we always say this to everybody we ever talk to, is it's never too early to start to learn core skills. Yeah. Take, for instance, programming. I mean, you wouldn't expect to just come to university and start programming on day one of university, having no experience of that whatsoever. So some level of scripting or programming is always sensible to learn in your own time. And we would hope that you enjoy what you do. The same thing would be true of art. We always say to students that are considering art that they should be developing core art skills. You can begin with drawing and sculpting and painting and all those sorts of things, and then, maybe just work in a digital format. As far as painting, digital painting is a really interesting skill set to develop. But there are lots of free pieces of software that would allow you to develop digital sculpting skills, for instance. You can even get your hands dirty using the engines because they're free. So we tend to use Unity and Unreal Engine 4, and we will be moving to Unreal Engine 5 quite soon. But these engines are free. You can download them and you can start to understand how they tick. Where we would just advise anyone to start developing those core skills, build a portfolio around them. I mean, certainly an art portfolio is a very easy thing to understand what that would look like. A portfolio of simple game mechanics. It doesn't have to be a completely fully fledged game, but a portfolio that just demonstrates some nice core key mechanics would be really useful. And think about where you want this to take you. This journey of going to university isn't just about the process of being at uni. It takes you somewhere. It's a journey that's going to take you on to hopefully a career that you're going to love. So think about what that is going to look like. And certainly, if you wanted to talk to any lecturer at any university, if you go onto an open day at a university, you can talk to those lecturers about what your passions are and how you would go about finding that career. And then, of course, there's how do you differentiate between what courses do. That's one thing that we say is you could look out for the screen skills tick. It's an accredited award awarded by the games industry via a government body, and it tells you that course is doing things at an appropriate level that industry believe in.
If I could just jump back a few points on that one. One of the questions we get a lot from programmers is, how do I build a portfolio? And you did mention, actually, Daryl, the idea of a few mechanics being shared. And I think quite often another approach for programmers is a blog, effectively, of things you are doing, interesting maths or interesting problems that you have solved. Maybe making a few screenshots of those, sharing some of the code or the maths behind it, and just logging the cool things that you do in programming. Okay, some of the things you do early on, may not end up in your portfolio later. You will remove them, but it's a good habit to get into, isn't it? And sharing those, because with programming, it's often about the logic and thinking about how you got to that solution through that logic-based approach, and recording some of that, I think, can help people get a bit of an insight into how you think. I just wanted to add that on the end before we go on to careers.
Okay, well, we've already mentioned it, but it's obvious. The games industry is vast, absolutely huge nowadays, and it crosses across so many different areas. So we're not just talking about PC or console or mobile. There's so much more to it. We've already mentioned VR, but the games are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. So it is by far and away the world's largest entertainment sector, and crucially, this means that there are career opportunities available to you once you have your degree and once you've got a little bit of experience that are absolutely worldwide. We put this map up here showing you the game developers per country, and obviously this means that, as you probably know, the UK is a really strong base for video games. There are sort of giant hubs dotted across the whole of the UK, but of course this doesn't stop you going and working in Canada or the United States or anywhere else. So there's lots and lots of opportunities for seeing the world and fulfilling your dreams of a career at the same time. It's obviously, we've already said this. We're looking forward to sort of the new wave of VR and AR and on those sort of emerging technologies. And it is always an exciting and dynamic industry. I've been working in and around games for the best part of 30 years now, and it's always exciting. There's always something new that's happening. And, I'm always looking forward to the latest game releases just to see what's possible. And of course, the thing that we really should mention is the fact that you will be remunerated well. one of the nice things about working in this industry is not only do you get to be exceptionally creative, but you also do get paid actually quite well in this sector. And you know, over the last few years, we've seen those salaries increase quite a lot. So it's a well-paid area with excellent job prospects, and something that we can, you know, wholeheartedly recommend that you get into.
Cool. So back to us to finish. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to in terms of studying at university, studying games at university. Anything you want to close with, Daryl?
No, I would just say make a joined up decision. I mean, the key thing is we have been doing this a very long time collectively, and we've seen a lot of people decide that they want to study games because they are gamers. And they think that they will be coming to university and that will involve playing games and they can talk about games and so on and so forth. And we've always felt that that's a very different thing to what we actually do. So I would say, you know, whatever university you decide to study at, that you go and you go on the sort of open days and you go on the taster days and things of that nature, and you get a flavour of what those universities are actually all about and what they're doing. Speaking for us personally, you know, we're very interested in you developing skills that will actually help you create commercial product, and get your games out there in the real world, and then get your, you know, your job in the games industry if that's what you want, or start your own studio. But for us, it's, you know, we're all gamers, we all play games, but that isn't what makes us game developers. What makes us game developers is that we have those core skills that allow us to actually build games.